To welcome you to another presentation by Grow a Strong Family. We receive much of our funding through grants and through donations, and this particular presentation was funded by the Shana 15 grant. This presentation is on loss and forgiveness. In this webinar, we are going to be talking about loss, why we feel this sense of loss, forgiveness, what it is, why we need to forgive, and some strategies to help us move through it all. When our loved ones are diagnosed with a serious mental illness or any chronic illness, we're left to cope with learning how to live with a person who is physically present and psychologically and emotionally different. There's been plenty of research that supports what we as family members already know. And the loss that we feel, our loved ones do not follow through with their developmental milestones, for example. There may be delays in graduating college, getting work, getting their own apartments, developing a more independent lifestyle, getting married, having children, staying married, keeping their children. It could affect us in terms of our parents or our partners, their ability to work or not work, to take care of themselves, to comply with medication, to take medication properly. All of these things have an impact on our kinds of relationships that we have with our loved ones, and they affect our relationships very often in ways that are not constructive to us. And we feel a sense of loss. We're losing who we had known and the kind of relationship that we had had with them before the diagnosis became known. It's called disenfranchised grief or ambiguous grief, and it really is not grief or loss that's publicly acknowledged. You don't usually say to people, you know, I've lost my daughter because she has a serious mental illness and she's not able to function in the same way as she once did. Or my partner is not able to work because he just is so ill and he can't get out of bed. We don't say it. It doesn't get publicly acknowledged, and therefore it's not even sanctioned, which is probably why we don't say it. And there are many situations in which this disenfranchised grief comes to the fore. Mental illness is one of them, and the one that we are most concerned with at Grow a Strong Family, since what we do is support families uprooted by mental illness. However, it also is relevant for substance use disorder, criminal behavior, dementia, just to name a few. And we don't talk about it. There is a certain amount of shame, but there's also a lack of awareness and a great deal of ignorance. Very often substance use disorder comes comorbid with mental illness. We say criminal behavior, yet we know that the jails are filled with individuals who have mental illnesses. And there is a converse relationship between the few beds we have in psychiatric institutions versus the great quantity of beds that we have through our penal system. And if we had had more hospitalizations and more opportunities for individuals who are ill to receive inpatient treatment, then the numbers would be actually reversed from what they currently are. Ambiguous loss is significant loss. It's not clear. It doesn't have a finality to it, because there are times when our loved ones can be very present and very much like the people we've known and loved from the past, and yet that's fleeting and not anything we can really hang our hats on. And there's no sense of closure, because it's like divorce, where we still have to interact with the other parent if we have children, even though we're not connected in any other way anymore. Very often there's different kinds of ambiguous loss or disenfranchised loss. There's the leaving without saying goodbye, where our loved ones are psychologically present, but they're physically absent. And this can occur where an individual with ALS, for example, is often psychologically present but physically absent due to the nature of their illness. They can't get up, they can't walk around, they can't help you with chores, they can't clean the house, they can't drive their cars after a while, but their brains are sharp as can be, and if they're able to communicate, they will do so. Then there's the goodbye without leaving, where somebody is physically present but psychologically absent. And this is the kind that we see most often in dementia, but certainly when we're dealing with our loved ones when they're having a mental illness crisis. And this would look like if they're in a manic episode, for example, or they're psychotic, or they're hearing voices, where they're highly symptomatic, where their fears are overwhelming their ability to function on a more rational, practical plane. They're physically present, they look the same, which is part of the problem with this kind of a loss, because with invisible illnesses, and mental illness is an invisible illness, as is, by the way, diabetes and heart disease and cancer, except when someone has treatment, we don't identify as much that they're ill. And that therefore, it's not that they're choosing to not engage or participate or behave in more typical ways. It's that they can't, because the nature of their illness is such that they are compromised. So they're physically present, but psychologically absent. When loved ones have mental illnesses, there are times when they cannot fulfill their roles in relationships, and we miss them. We see this very often when we have partners who are high functioning enough that we fell in love with them and they were working, and all of a sudden they can have an episode, and it could be triggered just by life or the cycle of their illness, or a catastrophic event could occur, or there could be even a developmental milestone, a son or daughter getting married, a change of job, a different stage of life, whatever it is, and they're not able to, for a period of time, fulfill their obligations in their relationships with us. And we miss them because it is a sense of loss that fills us. Some things in life cannot be fixed. They can only be carried. And when we have loved ones who have changes in how their brains operate, this is what happens. So part of the grief process includes getting to a place of acceptance. But it's very hard to get to a place of acceptance when we're still trying to kind of wrap our heads around and our hearts around our loved ones no longer being available to us in the same way as they had been before. So we need to get to a place of forgiveness in order to get to a place of acceptance. This means that we have to forgive our loved ones for being chronically ill. We know rationally that it's not their fault. We get that. We don't blame people for being unwell. Yet, we feel as though we've agreed to a contract, we've agreed to a way of being on the planet and to being with each other. And when they're chronically ill and they can't honor that contract, we have to renegotiate our relationship. And we sometimes get very upset about that. We need to forgive ourselves for having the many feelings that we have around this. Those feelings are very normal, by the way. We're feeling let down and betrayed, and so are they. So we both need to do our work in order to get to a place of acceptance, and in order to do that, we have to get to that place of forgiveness. You will hear me say this probably many times. And we also have to forgive others who do not understand. For example, I was recently speaking to a woman, a family member that I'm helping, who has a son who she just found out has a very serious mental illness. He's 23 years old, and she's been wrestling with the frustration involved in his at times apparent ability to be the independent young man that he should be at 23. And at other times, the neediest toddler on the planet. He was recently diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. That's the working diagnosis. And sadly, that's a very serious mental illness. The onset is typically late teens, early 20s, which is when this mom was starting to have her biggest issues with this son. And she has another family event. One of her other children is getting married, and this son was supposed to be in the wedding, and now he's not sure that he could go to the wedding, and he's not comfortable leaving the house, and he doesn't want to be with a bunch of strangers. And since this is new, we talked about what can she say to the guests? What could she say to her other child about this one not showing up? That it's not a slight on anybody. It's the nature of his illness, especially with him still being highly symptomatic. Treatment is just in the early stages. He is not completely stable. And so we talked about ways to manage other people because they won't understand. So what we say is he has a medical condition that is just being treated. They just initiated treatment, and that's all I'm going to say about it. And that's legitimate. People will think what they think. We don't owe them any further explanations, especially when we're trying to come to terms with this new reality and what is it going to mean in terms of our relationships. I don't know that this child will ever be launched in the way that the other children in the family have been, because with his diagnosis, and he's already, some days he can handle the most complex software problems, and other days he can't remember to put an appointment on his phone calendar. And this is the nature of what mental illness often looks like, that there are times when our loved ones can show up and do what they need to do, and then there are, unfortunately, increasingly longer times when they're less capable. And we have to kind of get comfortable ourselves with what our new roles are going to be and what we can do about it. One of the things about being in a place of forgiveness is that it reminds us to keep an open mind, to be true to our experience without relinquishing ourselves to negativity. The more negative we are, the more we think shoulda, coulda, woulda, oughta, I must, I have to, this is what I want, I don't like that I'm angry, I'm disappointed, why am I disappointed, it's not his fault. We put ourselves in these catch-22 situations on a regular basis when the bottom line is that anybody getting any illness is really, as my PCP would say, a crapshoot. We all have a predilection for illness in one way or another, and it's through a combination of factors, internal and external, that will determine whether or not we get any illness. I had a stepmother who died of lung cancer. The woman never smoked in her life. It was a squamous cell, which means large cell non-smokers cancer, but it was just, that's what it was. She was a teacher. She taught in an environment where there was no smoking. It wasn't even that she was around secondhand smoke. It was just, she lost that hand, so to speak. And this is what happens. And if we can come to a place of, I get it. I get that illness happens. You don't cause it. You can't control it. You can't cure it. You can learn how to manage it. You can communicate your thoughts and feelings about it. And then you can be compassionate and caring, not only to your loved ones, but to yourself. And when you can reach a place where you're comfortable and you recognize, okay, this is what our new reality is. This is what our new normal is going to look like. Okay, what can I do? How can I handle this in a way that is a win-win for everybody? And that's when we identify that we need to develop a different relationship with our loved ones. So we're going to look at forgiveness now that we've talked a lot about the kind of losses that we experience. So what does it mean to forgive? It means, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, to cease to feel resentment against, to basically forgive our loved ones for not being well, forgive ourselves for having a lousy attitude about it. We give up resentment or a claim to requital. We don't have to wait for anybody to say they're sorry or to make amends to us for us to take care of ourselves in a loving way and to say, this is what it is. I don't have to carry around the disappointment, the discouragement, the anger, because the only person who is suffering from all of that because of the transgressions that their illness has initiated in our lives. In other words, their illness may very often cause our loved ones to be rude, to be disrespectful, inconsiderate, thoughtless, not follow through on commitments, not listen to what we're saying, not care that our feelings are hurt. Sometimes depending on how severe the symptoms are, they could be totally checked out. They could even be aggressive and violent. We need to let go of the pain, the hurt, and the blame. And the only way we can do that is to say it is what it is. And I can take good care of myself. It's okay. I don't let anybody treat me this way, whether they're sick or they're well. So now what do I need to do? I need to set appropriate boundaries. And by the way, on our website, growastrongfamily.org, we do have a module called Boundaries, where we spend a lot of time talking about how to set up appropriate boundaries, especially when loved ones have chronic illnesses, and in particular, chronic mental illnesses. So how to forgive a loved one for their mental illness. I picked this up from a blog post from Avalon Malibu. The link is at the bottom of the slide. And the very first thing we have to do is accept that our loved ones have a mental illness, and we didn't cause it, we can't control it, and we can't cure it. So we have to remember those 3 C's. We have to learn to forgive them for how they might behave and how that behavior might affect us. One of the things that happened very early on when my daughter was diagnosed with bipolar mania, she said to me, "Mom, I see myself doing and saying the most horrible things to the people I love, and I can't stop myself. It's as if I have no control and the illness is in charge." And that insight has stayed with me through these 7 years, 6 of which she has not engaged with us at all, with me at all. She has estranged herself. And in my heart of hearts, I believe it's because it is easier for her to not hurt me more by estranging herself than by engaging with me. There's no win in a situation like this, and there's no win when someone is highly symptomatic because their rational brain is not working properly. And it may take a long time for that brain to calm down. So we have to learn to forgive them for how they might behave and how that behavior might affect us. It doesn't mean forgetting. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. And it doesn't mean that accepting is condoning. Because you accept that someone is ill doesn't mean that you condone that when they behave in ways that are unacceptable, that all of a sudden it's okay. It's not. But it still comes down to what kind of limits are you going to set for yourself to maintain safety, security, awareness, respect. So this is where, again, it's reiterated to learn to set healthy boundaries, create healthy responses, and communicate in healthy ways. They're all part of the process. And very often we stay stuck in a place of anger and resentment and hurt because we don't have other tools. I welcome you to go visit the website. We have tons of tools, and you can always get in touch with us here at Grow a Strong Family if you want customized tools and skills and strategies for your particular situation. Sometimes forgiveness means giving all hope of a better past. We can't rewrite the past. We don't know what we don't know. The problem is that very often, by the time a diagnosis comes forth, we have already been exposed to a lot of not very nice behavior on their part and our part. And we can't redo that. We can look at it now through the lens of 2020 hindsight, but from here forward, we can do a lot better. Forgive and forget? No, we don't do it. If you forgive and forget, that's being a very naive person. The thing we always say, and you've probably heard this somewhere along the line, probably when you were learning about history, is that if we forget history, we are condemned to repeating it. If you don't want to repeat the past, then remember it, learn from it, and move on. That's what it means to be wise. If you don't forget and you forget. You become that guy in Memento who had to write on his arms so that he would remember, so that he could try doing something different. And that's just stupid. The best thing to do is to say, now I know, and to move. Several strategies that you can take in this process, and all of them are involved in taking good, loving care of yourself. Things like meditation, whatever that's going to look like for you, exercise, coloring. Adult coloring is fabulous, by the way, for reducing stress, for processing, and there are many great resources that are available out in the world to help you with that. And I love the Affirminators. It's affirmation cards to help you help yourself without the self-helpy feeling. They're humorous, they're funny, they're activity-based. But even if you want to be more serious, as some of us are, any affirmations that give you a positive feeling and a positive sense is always of benefit. For example, and this was, I found this from a blog written by Eric Argaus called The Agony of Forgiveness, Making Amends After Mental Illness. And one of the things that he says is, even though I had done these things while biochemically removed from reality, I still had done them. If someone burns your house down by mistake, it is an accident, but that accident can destroy your entire life. It still needs to be dealt with, and responsibility still needs to be taken. So even though we may never get an amends or an I'm sorry from our loved ones, it doesn't mean that we forget and we don't hold them responsible. What it means is that from the ashes, we have to create something new. This resource, Hidden Victims, Hidden Healers, an 8-stage healing process for family and friends of the mentally ill by Julie Taylor Johnson, is a phenomenal book that you can get online at Amazon, and that oftentimes we use in our Replanting Lives support groups. And it's a great resource in laying bare what the issues are that family members deal with, including siblings, parents, children, the different roles that family members take on, and great strategies. Next is the stage of forgiveness. I forgive myself for any mistakes I have made. I forgive and release those who have harmed me. This is the stage. This is what it means. Of course, I've made mistakes. Part of the mistakes that I make as a loved one of an individual with a chronic illness is that I reacted. I didn't know. I didn't know what I didn't know. I don't know now. I don't do it perfectly. There's not a blueprint that I can read and follow to guide me. This is true of parenting, by the way, and this is also true as our children get older. You know, there are thousands of books about how to parent children through the toddler years, infancy, toddler, school age years, fewer books on the middle school years, fewer books on the teenage years, practically nothing beyond when our children become adults, because we're still parenting them. The big secret is that we have to learn how to do it in such a way that we can retain a more constructive relationship with them, because they don't need our guidance in quite the same way. So we have to forgive ourselves for any mistakes we make, and forgive and release those who have harmed us, because just like we've made mistakes, they're learning too. And in their case, their very brain with a mental illness is what is compromised. So the very part of them to assess and process and examine and explore is compromised. It's almost as if they can't help but make mistakes. In stage 6, you're asked to release your emotional pain, which means you have to acknowledge it. So you have to really lay it out for yourself. How have you been disappointed, lied to, frightened, harmed in some way? Feel your feelings. It's usually anger, hurt, fear, could be disappointment, discouragement. You get the idea. Move through it. Release it, so it does not fester in you as resentment or negativity. We know what negativity is. In 12-step programs, they refer to resentment as premeditated expectations. When we have these premeditated expectations of the paths that our families are going to take, we're already setting ourselves and our families up for resentment. But this is especially true when our loved ones have mental illnesses, because they are not capable of taking the paths that we thought that they would take, at least not in the way that we thought that they would go. And the picture is a picture of don't catch without releasing. Catch and release is how most people go fishing. Forgiveness is the ultimate act of love, the ultimate act of acceptance. It allows movement, growth, even in accepting the way that things are, rather than as we might. Consider that what forgiveness is, really, is working on ourselves and coming to a place of peacefulness. Forgiveness is willingness to drop the narrative on a particular injustice. You know how we do that? We keep telling ourselves the same story over and over and over again about what happened. We play it out, what they did, how we were injured, and all the rest of the upsetting things we remind ourselves in relation to whatever it is that is so unforgivable. And the reality is, if we drop that narrative, if we say, this is what the illness looks like, this is what the symptoms look like, this is how I felt at the time, and now that I understand, I can let that go. I can release it. I don't have to hang. Forgiveness is the decision to let the past be what it was. It's in the past. We can't go back and fix it. We can't repair it. We certainly can't replace it. It's as imperfect and not what we wish it had been as ever. But it's in the past. Thank goodness, because now we have today, and that means we can. It means we stop the shoulda, coulda, woulda, and relinquish the idea that we can create a better past. You forget about things. It just means you have to accept what happened and continue living. There are 7 rules of forgiveness, and what's so nice about them is who knew there were rules, right? I always look for blueprints. Forgiveness doesn't mean that you have to forget too. This, as you see, has been a major theme of this presentation, but it's also true about how to move forward from a hurtful, destructive situation that's been harmful to me and others and get to a place of peacefulness. So it doesn't mean you have to forget. It doesn't mean you're minimizing your victimization experience. You've been hurt. Your loved ones may never be able to own what they've done. That doesn't mean that you haven't been hurt. It doesn't mean you're a chump. It's not a sign of weakness, naivety, or it doesn't depend upon the other person apologizing and accepting your offer of forgiveness. They may never understand what they did. They may never admit that they did anything at all. And that's okay, because forgiveness is about taking care of yourself, getting you to a place of peacefulness, getting you to a place where you release the knot that's in your stomach, where your body can loosen up, where you can have kinder, generous, more forgiving thoughts, more love. Forgiveness is a process. It's not an all one or none. It's not black and white, and it's not either or, and it's not done once. Forgiveness is for your health and well-being. Research shows that holding on to anger is toxic for your health. When you're not engaging in forgiveness, you're doing nobody a favor, least of all yourself. And the secret sauce in forgiveness is letting go of the anger, because ultimately anger hides so many of the feelings that we feel because we're in a place of unforgiveness. We're hooked and we're attached, but we're attached in a very destructive. You have the opportunity to create a different story of your life moving forward. You can develop a new relationship with your loved one now that you have this new information. You've been able to let go of the anger. You can accept what your limitations are, and you can embrace what theirs are as well as what they're able to do. Describe in detail what this is going to look like for you, because the more specific you are in terms of creating your story moving forward, the more likely you are to implement it and actualize it. You can do this through words, art, photography, music, dance, whatever form is. Remember, there are no shortcuts. You cannot forgive someone until you have fully felt the pain that's been caused for you. And you unhook yourself by unhooking the offender first. I realize that you're ill. You couldn't do any better, what you did was really painful to me. I know this is what your illness looks like. And I have had to work very hard to come to a place that where I was able to separate the behavior or the symptoms from the person. Because the person I knew and loved would never have gone out of their way to hurt me this deeply. However, the illness would certainly do that. In this webinar, we have talked about loss, forgiveness, shared some strategies for walking. Of course, when best laid plans fail, you always want to take good, loving care of yourself. Some of the resources that we used in developing this seminar. If you're looking for more information on Grow a Strong Family, visit us at growastrongfamily.org, growastrongfamily@outlook.com, and our phone number is 781-405-83. As always, take what you like and leave the rest.